The execution of Robert Alton Harris may have made capital punishment even more controversial.
How do 13 lives stretched across 30 years end in a single narrow room on San Quentin's bay-washed edge? Each name carries a crime that stole breath and a final moment that still sparks fierce debates about mercy and justice. Tonight, we trace every step, from blood-drenched streets to last meal crumbs, to understand what really happens when California flips the fatal switch. Keep watching, subscribe below, and join the conversation about whether any state should wield that power at all. Robert Alton Harris. A San Diego childhood riddled with beatings and petty crime hardened Harris long before dawn broke on July 5, 1978. That morning, he and his younger brother snatched two teenage friends from a Jack-in-the-Box parking lot, laughing as they waved a 9mm pistol and forced the boys to drive toward an empty canyon. 45 frantic minutes later, the gun barked twice. Dreams ended in the powder-sweet smell of chaparral, and the brothers roared away to rob a bank with the stolen car. A sharp-eyed witness tailed them home, police swarmed, and Robert Harris, still trying to burn bloody clothes in the fireplace, was dragged out in cuffs. Prosecutors painted a picture of swaggering cruelty. Jurors needed barely a day to return 2 death sentences. 23 years of appeals ricocheted through every level of the courts until the U.S. Supreme Court thundered, "No further stays." In the gray chill before sunrise on April 21, 1992, Harris paced a tiny holding cell, leafing through scripture, cracking jokes with the chaplain, and ordering a feast big enough for a high school football team, 2 large Domino's pizzas, a 21-piece bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, a 6-pack of Pepsi, and a carton of mint chocolate ice cream. When guards finally opened the green door of San Quentin's gas chamber, he settled into the metal chair as if it were a tatty recliner, winked at the witnesses, and tossed off a line from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper." A hiss, a green cloud, and California's first execution in 25 years was over. David Edwin Mason. Oakland detectives called him the Night Crawler long before headlines did. Between March and December 1980, Mason strangled 4 elderly neighbors, rifling their apartments for coins, trinkets, and the sick thrill of watching life drain away. Jailed on suspicion months later, he used a knotted towel to garrote his cellmate, then strung the corpse from a shower rod to fake suicide. Confessions poured out, taped for his parents, retold to police, yet the killer who once bragged, "I'm better than Ted Bundy," now claimed hopelessness drove him. In 1993, after a decade of automatic appeals, Mason stunned the courts by firing his lawyers and demanding an execution date, insisting that every extra sunrise was a stolen thing. A psychiatric panel pronounced him competent. The Ninth Circuit reluctantly agreed. Just after midnight on August 24, 1993, Mason strode into the same turquoise-painted chamber that had ended Harris. He refused the ritual indulgence of a final supper. Only ice water touched his lips, and when Warden Daniel Vasquez asked if he wished to halt the gassing, Mason met his eyes and said, "No, Warden, I want to proceed." "Thank you," cyanide pellets clattered, gray fog climbed the glass, and at 12:23 a.m. the volunteer was gone, leaving behind no last words and no mourners, only 5 grieving families in a state still arguing over what mercy means. Keith Daniel Williams. Merced farm boy, Vietnam vet, barroom brawler. Williams wore many masks, and none fit comfortably. In October 1978, he crashed through a trailer door high on liquor and resentment, slaughtering 3 friends in front of a 9-year-old witness who would forever remember the smell of gunpowder and fear. A week-long manhunt ended in a Central Valley orchard where deputies found him asleep beneath a tarpaulin, rifle across his chest. At trial, he ranted that demons controlled his trigger finger. Psychiatrists whispered schizophrenia. Jurors saw only unfiltered rage. They voted for death in 1979, and the legal carousel spun for 17 years until every petition collapsed. On May 2, 1996, the eve of execution, Williams asked for a supper that tasted like forgotten Sundays: fried pork chops, a butter-slicked baked potato, asparagus spears, blue cheese salad, a wedge of apple pie, and a tall glass of whole milk. He spent the evening with his attorneys and a Pentecostal pastor, speaking softly about forgiveness, but promising no apology. At 12:03 a.m., the warden signaled. 5 minutes later, the chemicals swept through his veins. Keith Daniel Williams offered no final statement, only an exhale that hovered in the stillness like dust motes in moonlight, before monitors flatlined at 12:08 a.m. Silence, at last, after the storm he'd sown. William George Bonin. For Southern California hitchhikers in 1979, the olive green van with the tinkling ice cream bells was death on wheels. William Bonin, abused child, Vietnam gunner, ex-con groomed by predators, cruised freeways with ropes and butcher knives, coaxing teenage boys inside before unleashing hours of torture. 4 accomplices helped. At least 14 sons never made it home. A surveillance tail caught him mid-assault in June 1980, and the evidence: bloody tire irons, nylon cords, maps dotted with dump sites, drew a red line straight to death row. 2 counties convicted him. Parents filled court benches clutching yearbook photos. The freeway killer shrugged. Execution day, February 23, 1996, found Bonin oddly nostalgic. He devoured 2 large pepperoni and sausage pizzas, 3 pints of coffee ice cream, and 18 cans of Coca-Cola, joking that he'd finally get room service. Minutes before midnight, he composed a statement decrying capital punishment for teaching vengeance. Young people act as they see other people acting. At 12:09 a.m., the IV lines opened. Bonin's sermon drifted through glass to grieving families, but the irony hung heavier than the sedatives. California's first lethal injection subject preaching nonviolence, while his victims lay quiet in the earth. 4 minutes later, the warden pronounced him dead, and the van of nightmares was finally parked for good. Thomas Martin Thompson. Long before the television floodlights ringed San Quentin, Thompson was the soft-spoken drifter who crashed on friends' couches and charmed waitresses with Shakespeare quotes. One humid Orange County night in September 1981, his charm curdled into terror. Ginger Fleischle, 20 and trusting, never came home from a pizza parlor hangout. 3 days later, farmhands uncovered her body in an Irvine field, wrapped in a blanket and stabbed 5 times behind the ear. Detectives followed a breadcrumb trail of carpet fibers, semen swabs, and a sleeping bag borrowed from Thompson's roommate straight to the man who now claimed he'd only watched as someone else raped and killed her. Jurors believed the forensic traces instead of the storyteller and sent him to death row in 1984. For 14 years, Thompson's defenders battled through appellate courts, waiving doubts about contaminated evidence and ineffective counsel. But every stay dissolved as the calendar crept toward July 14, 1998. On his last evening, he ordered a feast fit for a seaside carnival: Alaskan king crab dripping butter, spinach salad, mandarin spare ribs, pork fried rice, a hot fudge sundae, and a 6-pack of Coca-Cola, then penned a final note. "I don't want anyone to avenge my death. Stop killing people. God bless." At 12:01 a.m., the lethal injection pushed cold fire through his veins. At 12:06, the monitors stilled, and his whispered claim of innocence floated unanswered into the morning fog. Jatturun Siripongs. Siripongs left Thailand as a restless teen, chasing California's bright promise through dishwashing jobs and weekend meditations. But light and shadow fused on December 15, 1981. Garden Grove police found grocery store owner Pakawan Watanaporn strangled in her storeroom, and clerk Kwach Nguyen stabbed beyond recognition. Blood splashed the tile. An abandoned credit card lay by the till, and a severed phone cord coiled like a question mark. 2 days later, officers arrested Siripongs as he tried to buy gifts with the victim's plastic. His hands were cut, his trunk spattered. He admitted the robbery, yet swore another man wielded the knife, refusing to name him to spare karma. The jury bowed to physical evidence and condemned him in 1983. Appeals stretched across 16 years, drawing pleas for mercy from Buddhist monks and even Watanaporn's widower, but Governor Davis stood firm. On February 9, 1999, Siripongs spent his last hours chanting sutras, refusing television, and requesting only 2 cans of Lucky Arctic iced tea and 2 cups of Mission Pride peaches. At 12:05 a.m., the drugs began their silent tide. He offered no last words, only a slow exhale. 15 minutes later, the monitors flickered off, and witnesses said the chamber felt colder than before. Manuel Pina Babbitt. Vietnam followed Manny Babbitt home like an invisible platoon. Nightmares of Hugh's gunfire, echoing screams, a Purple Heart tucked in a sock drawer he could barely open. On a rain-smeared Easter morning in 1980, a psychotic flash sent him prowling a Sacramento apartment complex. 78-year-old Leah Schendel awoke to fists pounding her door. She collapsed from a heart attack while Babbitt beat her and rifled drawers for coins to feed his next binge. A fingerprint on the broken glass and a stolen TV pawn ticket cornered him weeks later. Jurors heard combat medics testify about shrapnel still lodged in his skull, but the law judged the act, not the wounds, and sentenced him to die in 1982. His brother Bill campaigned for clemency, arguing post-traumatic madness. Pope John Paul II joined the chorus, yet the court's answer was no. On May 3, 1999, the eve of his 50th birthday, Babbitt refused the customary $50 feast and asked that the money be donated to homeless veterans instead. Just after midnight, strapped to the gurney, he scanned the witness gallery and breathed, "I forgive all of you." At 12:37 a.m., the lethal cocktail quieted the battlefield in his head for good, leaving a folded American flag on the morgue cart. Darrell Keith Rich. Shasta County's dusk hides secrets in Pine Needle Hollows, but in the summer of 1978, girls kept disappearing before sunset. Darrell Rich, 23 and boastful, cruised the county roads in a brown Camaro, offering rides, cold beer, or just a smile. 4 young women, ages 11 to 26, accepted and never came back. Their bodies surfaced along isolated river bends, wrists wired, skulls crushed by river rock. Meticulous knots matched bootlaces in Rich's bedroom. A high-speed chase ended with his arrest that December, and within days he bragged to cellmates about hunting victims. The jury's verdict thundered death in 1981. Yet, 19 years of appeals trickled through state and federal courts, while families marked anniversaries with flowers on river stones. On March 15, 2000, Rich declined a special meal. Fasting, he sipped warm tea, vegetable broth, and Gatorade, while a spiritual advisor read native prayers he had embraced late in life. Strapped to the gurney at 12:07 a.m., he glanced once at the victim's parents behind bulletproof glass and uttered a single word. Peace. 6 minutes later, his pulse vanished, and the eighth execution in modern California history closed the book on a Camaro's dark journey. Robert Lee Massey. Robert Massey's entire biography reads like a dare to fate. At 17, he shot a Bakersfield grocery clerk during a robbery, drawing a 1965 death sentence later commuted when California briefly outlawed capital punishment. Paroled in 1978, he swaggered into San Francisco's Circle K on January 3, 1979, and executed liquor store owner Boris G. Naumoff for the cash in the till. A customer hiding behind a display dialed 911. Massey was caught 2 blocks away, gun still warm. Prosecutors emphasized brutality and the second chance he had already squandered. Jurors delivered another death verdict. For 22 years, Massey pirouetted through the appellate maze, at one point insisting he wanted to abandon his appeals, then retracting, then re-embracing them. Each loop tightened families' grief. Finally, in March 2001, the Ninth Circuit exhausted every avenue and set an execution date. The condemned man spent his last night writing awkward apologies to Naumoff's relatives and rereading the Gospel of John. He declined a lavish feast, requesting only a cup of black coffee and a single cheese omelet at dawn. Minutes before the blinds rose in the viewing chamber, he spoke calmly to the warden. "I hope tonight brings peace." A saline drip hissed, chemicals followed, and at 12:21 a.m., Massey exhaled for the last time. Too late to redeem the second chance he never earned. Stephen Wayne Anderson. Stephen Anderson grew up in a cyclone of foster homes, petty theft, and juvenile hall escapes. At 26, he walked away from a Utah prison and drifted to the Mojave, burglarizing a lonely Laybeck ranch house on May 26, 1980. Inside, 81-year-old schoolteacher Elizabeth Lyman awoke. Anderson shot her between the eyes, brewed himself noodles in her kitchen, and watched television beside the corpse until sunrise. Police found him hiding in a crawlspace 3 days later, still wearing her jewelry. During trial, he boasted of other killings and offered to teach marksmanship to the jury. They answered with a swift death sentence. For 2 decades, appellate lawyers argued schizophrenia and childhood neglect, but Anderson sabotaged them with letters describing murder as red music. January 29, 2002, arrived cold and wind-scoured. Anderson's final meal was eccentric even for death row. 2 grilled cheese sandwiches, a pint of cottage cheese, a serving of hominy, peach pie, chocolate chip ice cream, and raw radishes. Strapped to the gurney, he quoted William Ernest Henley's Invictus. "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul," then added, "But I was a damned poor captain." The injection slid in at 12:16 a.m. By 12:22, the self-styled poet lay still. His last stanza ended. Donald J. Beardsley. Donald Beardsley served honorably in the Air Force until a head injury and schizophrenia diagnosis cracked his sense of consequence. In 1981, a San Francisco cocaine dealer demanded he teach a lesson to 2 associates who had stolen a stash. Beardsley, detached and methodical, lured college student Stacy Benjamin and her friend Patty Gettling to a Redwood City house. The ambush turned frantic. Benjamin strangled with an electrical cord, Gettling chased through blackberry thickets, shot, then stabbed to prove she was dead. A footprint in the mud and Beardsley's matter-of-fact confession sealed his fate. Jurors chose death in 1984. Appeals revolved around brain scans showing frontal lobe damage, but every court balanced that against the calculated savagery and, after 20 years, stopped the clock. On January 18, 2005, Beardsley ordered a simple supper: 2 grilled hamburgers, onion rings, strawberry ice cream, and root beer, and spent the evening praying with a Lutheran chaplain. Before witnesses, he apologized softly. "I'm sorry for what I've done. I hope my death brings closure." At 12:29 a.m., the barbiturate cascade began. 5 minutes later, the machinist's heart, which once ticked with lethal precision, gave one final stutter and quit. Stanley "Tookie" Williams. In 1971, Stanley Williams and Raymond Washington fused neighborhood crews into the Crips, baptizing Los Angeles streets in blue bandanas and gunfire. 8 years later, Williams was convicted of killing 7-Eleven clerk Albert Owens during a robbery, and weeks after, gunning down motel owners Yenny Yang, Tsai She Chiang Yang, and their daughter Yue inside their family business. Ballistics locked him to the shotgun. Eyewitnesses described his laughter. Sentenced to die in 1981, Williams seethed in solitary until the 1990s, when he began writing anti-gang children's books, earning nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize and endorsements from celebrities who argued he had transformed. Courts acknowledged his outreach but ruled that atonement did not erase 4 bodies. On December 12, 2005, Williams skipped the special meal privilege, choosing oatmeal and milk from the canteen. In the final hour, he addressed the victims' families. "I did not kill, but I hope you find peace." The needle slid home just after midnight. As the drug surged, he looked toward his supporters and whispered, "People are dying every day. Please stay strong." At 12:35 a.m., the cardiac monitor flatlined. Outside, candlelight vigils clashed with pro-death penalty chants, but the steel door of the execution chamber closed on California's 12th modern execution, and its most fiercely debated. Clarence Ray Allen, the old man who ordered death from a prison cot. Clarence Ray Allen entered the world of crime like a quiet undertow, slow and relentless. He ranched in Tulare County by day and robbed stores by night, recruiting teenagers with promises of easy money and loyalty that ended at the trigger. In 1974, his crew looted Fran's Market in Fresno for a fistful of cash and stolen checks. When 19-year-old Mary Sue Kitts threatened to talk, Allen ordered her strangled and dumped in Friant Kern Canal. The secret stayed buried until a remorseful accomplice confessed in 1977. Allen drew life without parole and landed in Folsom's gray miles of bars, yet the story should have ended there. It did not. From behind razor wire, Allen studied visiting hours, memorized phone routines, and mapped out revenge on every witness who had testified against him. He whispered the plan to fellow inmate Billy Ray Hamilton: drive to Fresno, obliterate the traitors, collect payment from Allen's son. On September 5, 1980, Hamilton burst into Fran's Market armed with a sawed-off shotgun and pistol. By the time the smoke cleared, teenagers Brian Schlietowitz, Douglas White, and 19-year-old Josephine Rocha lay bleeding between the produce bins. Hamilton was caught within hours, but investigators quickly followed the money trail: collect calls, coded letters, commissary receipts, back to Allen's cell. A new jury heard prison snitches describe the plot in chilling detail. They returned 3 death sentences in 1982. For more than 2 decades, Allen's appeals bounced from California's Supreme Court to the Ninth Circuit, lawyers citing failing eyesight, diabetes, and a heart rebuilt by surgery. Executing a feeble 76-year-old, they argued, turns justice into geriatric cruelty. The courts answered that age does not erase premeditation. On January 16, 2006, Allen celebrated his birthday in a quiet holding cell with buffalo ribeye steak, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken thighs, sugar-free pecan pie, vanilla ice cream, and a pint of whole milk, foods he could scarcely chew with failing dentures but familiar tastes of a vanished country life. Moments before midnight, he shuffled to the gurney, leaning on guards half his age. adjusted the beaded native necklace on his hospital smock, and addressed the witnesses through thick lenses. "Hoka hey," he said in a Lakota warrior's cry. "It's a good day to die. I love you all." The fourth surge stilled his failing heart at 12:38 a.m., making him the oldest prisoner executed in California and the final life claimed before the state's gurney fell silent.